I remember talking with a teacher about media literacy lessons that they were doing with their class. The class was learning how different media outlets cover the news, not just which stories they choose to cover, but also the different language they use to describe the same stories. The teacher wanted a way of consolidating what the students had learned, and that got us thinking. Could a computer learn to recognise the sorts of patterns that they'd been learning about? And could we use an AI project to reinforce and get the students to think about what they'd been learning? I helped his class give this a try. They chose 4 national newspapers and they worked together to collect examples of the top front page headline for each newspaper across a few months. And we used these examples to train a machine learning model. So the next question was, how could the students tell if the computer had learned to recognise the use of language in these different newspapers? So they made a game in Scratch to test it. The idea was that when you type in a headline, the machine learning model would predict which newspaper that probably came from and would move the newspaper to the right shelf. Now the students started by using the same headlines for this that they'd collected for training. I asked them if they thought that made a good test. They were a bit confused by this and they didn't see where I was going with it. So I used the tests and exams that they do in school as an example. I asked them, do your exams all have the exact same questions written in the exact same wording that you studied in class? Now they said no, of course not. So I asked them why not. With a bit of prompting, they described how they get new questions for exams that they haven't seen before, because that's a fairer way of seeing if they've really understood the idea rather than just memorised an answer. Now, by this point, they had realised where I was going with this, so they started collecting new newspaper headlines for testing, new headlines that they hadn't used in the training. From their experience with this project, they learned that they needed to test with new and different headlines if they were really going to be able to know that their machine learning model had learned how different newspapers use language. They'd learned from their experience that machine learning projects need to keep training and test data separate.